Bonjour tout le monde, vous allez bien? C'est un plaisir de... Merci d'être là aujourd'hui. Écoutez, c'est un grand plaisir. On vient de conclure la rencontre des ministres des Finances des provinces et des territoires. Une très bonne rencontre qui arrive à un moment opportun. Vous savez, il n'y a pas longtemps, on a présenté le budget de 2025, un plan d'investissement pour le pays. Puis c'était important de travailler avec mes collègues de façon très étroite pour mettre en œuvre, évidemment, les politiques fiscales qu'on a annoncées, les investissements historiques en infrastructure, en logement, dans la productivité et l'innovation, mais évidemment aussi dans la souveraineté, la défense du Canada. On a eu le privilège d'avoir différentes personnes qui sont venues avec nous. Le ministre Leblanc est venu nous parler un peu de l'état de la situation avec la révision de l'accord de libre-échange avec nos partenaires américains et mexicains. On a eu différents intervenants qui sont venus aussi nous parler de la situation sur le commerce interne. On a eu le gouverneur de la Banque centrale du Canada, Tiff Macklem, qui est venu aussi nous donner un peu un état des lieux sur la situation économique vue de sa perspective. Moi, j'ai partagé avec les collègues la récente rencontre qu'on a eue avec les ministres des Finances du G7, évidemment, qui s'est tenue lundi. Donc, c'était un agenda qui était chargé, mais je pense que ce que vous voyez ensemble, puis vous aurez la chance d'entendre mes collègues, beaucoup d'unité, unité dans l'action, unité dans la vision, unité aussi dans un sens de vouloir faire plus ensemble. Je pense qu'on s'est dit qu'il fallait agir avec rapidité, avec ambition. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire comme ministre des Finances à travers les différents budgets, mais aussi à travers nos différentes capitales pour accélérer, je pense, le pas. Je pense qu'il y avait un désir d'accélérer nos actions. Et je remercie vraiment les collègues parce qu'ensemble, on peut faire la différence. On se rend compte qu'il y a un moment d'unité nationale qui est assez unique dans l'histoire du pays. Je pense que les gens qui sont ici sont prêts à répondre au rendez-vous, prêts à répondre aussi à l'action qu'on a besoin. C'est vrai qu'il y a du vent de face à l'échelle internationale, mais comme le premier ministre l'a dit souvent, il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut contrôler, bâtir une économie canadienne, être nos meilleurs clients, développer nos processus d'acquisition, développer, par exemple, des processus qui vont nous permettre d'aller plus rapidement dans l'émission des permis, regarder au niveau de l'approvisionnement. Donc, on a vraiment fait un éventail des choses qu'on peut faire ensemble. So, I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for coming here to Ottawa. It's a privilege to be with you. This is on the back of Budget 2025, where we provided a blueprint for the future of this country, an investment budget that focuses on the key things that will grow this nation to be the strongest economy in the G7, looking at infrastructure, looking at housing, looking at productivity, innovation, looking at our defense, investment in defense. We were joined this morning by Minister Leblanc, which came and gave a good overview, I would say, of the CUSMA situation, talking about the review, talking about his recent visit to Mexico. We also had colleagues which talked about the situation about internal trade. We had the governor of the Bank of Canada, which came to give us his perspective about the state of the Canadian economy. I had the opportunity to share with my colleagues the recent discussion at the G7. Canada hosted a G7 finance ministers meeting just earlier this week. And what you see, I think, is a sense of unity, a sense of action, a sense of purpose. You know, we all understand that we need ambition. Speed and scale is going to be key. We talk about things, how we can move forward on housing, how can we do more on infrastructure, how can we move from one project, one review, making sure that we seize the opportunity that is in front of us. There's a bit of headwind. We understand that. We have all seen it. But there's a lot we can do. And the Prime Minister have said, focus on what we can control. That's what we're doing. And I think the team that you see here is really the one which can deliver for Canadians. So I'm grateful because there's a sense of unity, a sense of purpose, and really a sense of working together as one nation for the benefit of our workers, our industry, and obviously our country. So with that, I'll turn over to Jill, which is really the chair. I'm just the host. The real chair is Jill from Prince Edward Island. So Jill, I'll turn over to you, and then we'll be taking questions. Merci. Jill, the floor is yours. I'll go there.
Thank you, Minister Champagne. And yes, the meetings that we just had over the course of the day, and we had an earlier provincial territorial meeting, was very productive. I think we're all walking away with a renewed sense of ambition. There was a lot of talk of our economy, productivity, trying to make that tax dollar go a little bit farther for Canadians, so working together. There is a lot of an alignment here between the federal government, the provincial government, and so looking to find efficiencies and more effective spends for Canadians to deliver what we need to deliver collectively, and to raise our nation just a little bit higher, growing our GDP, nation-building projects, but what the provinces will be looking for is a little bit of flexibility. That's what we're looking for. We gained a lot of clarification over the course of the day on different funding streams. So we got a lot of answers today, a lot of clarification, and I think we have a lot of action items that we're all going to take back. We're going to meet more regularly and come to the table with what's been done at the next meeting. So there's accountability built in. So yeah, I think Canadians can probably feel good about what we accomplished today. I think we're all going back and we're going to get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The ministers will now take questions for 25 minutes. Les ministres prendront maintenant des questions pour 25 minutes. One question, one follow-up as always, starting with Promit.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. And yeah, as you know, this is Promit Mukherjee from Reuters. Minister, I have a question on G7. I mean, recently there was a G7 finance ministers meeting, and the talks about leveraging the frozen Russian assets have resurfaced. So what is Canada's stance on that, and which institution in Canada actually holds the bulk of these assets?
Well, that's a very good question, and it gave me the opportunity to brief my colleagues, the finance ministers of Canada about the discussion. You would know that in our last G7 meeting, which was on Monday, the main item on the agenda, there was discussions around critical minerals, around export control, and obviously Ukraine. As you know, since Canada chaired the G7, Ukraine has always been a key focus of our attention as G7 ministers. There have been updates about what our European colleagues are doing, because as you know, the funds are held at Euroclear in Brussels. So there's been discussion about the different scenarios that our friends in Europe are looking at. I know they'll have a meeting on December 19 with the leaders to decide the way forward. There's different options, as you would know well, on the table for our European colleagues to decide. From a Canadian perspective, as you know, there's very little assets which are within jurisdiction. But Canada is very, we've always been very helpful, I would say, in this discussion, not only in convening the meetings as chair, but also as providing solution. And I want to salute also the work of my colleague, Chrystia Freeland, our special envoy for Ukraine. We always have the finance minister of Ukraine as well as a partner. We met just recently. Everyone is focused on trying to find a way forward to leverage the frozen Russian assets in order to provide the support which is very much needed. The IMF presented also their options. So I would say it's an ongoing discussion. We all try to do our utmost to support Ukraine at this very difficult moment, understanding their financing need, understanding that we need to leverage the frozen Russian assets, and at the same time, Canada has been at the forefront of these discussions to provide solutions.
As a follow-up, there has been a raft of very good numbers on the economy recently. I mean, we know about the GDP, jobs, and even the trade data today. Do you think this good streak will be sustainable going forward into the next year?
Well, listen, one thing I've heard and one thing I've learned is humility. When you're in a world, and I can leave some of my colleagues if they want to add, but you will have seen when we presented our budget in November, we referred to the uncertainty index produced by the International Monetary Fund. And you would have seen that if you look at the world today, the level of uncertainty is higher than what you found in 2008 during the financial crisis. So when you're navigating in a world of uncertainty, I think, yes, Canada has good performance, like you said, on job numbers, on growth. I think we heard from the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the economy is probably more resilient than some had perhaps anticipated even a year ago. Going forward, I believe in the fundamentals. I mean, those are the people who will deliver. When I look, we're a magnet for talent. Canada in the G7 is one of the few countries where we produce cars, we produce planes, we produce ships. ships, we've been a leader in AI and quantum. We have critical minerals. We have natural resources. We have energy. We're a leader in nuclear energy. We're the only one in the G7 with a free trade agreement with all the other G7 nations. So the fundamentals are strong. Now, what we need to do is the work that, we said today we met. We have the blueprint of the federal budget. There are going to be provincial, territorial budgets coming. Now it's all about execution. It's about speed and scale, seizing the opportunity, meeting the moment. But you're right. When you compare, and I'll be in Europe next week, we'll be meeting with the French finance minister, the German finance minister, and the UK chancellor to look at the way forward. But I think it's true. If you compare Canada to many, we are in a great fiscal position. But we also live in a world of uncertainty. So we need to make sure that everything we can do domestically, we're going to do together. But I don't know if my colleagues, Peter, or someone wants to add to that.
Sure. Thank you, François-Philippe. I also want to commend you on chairing, from the federal perspective, a great meeting, and Jill Burge from PEI did a fantastic job in PEI. Look, I think Canadians are very resilient, so I'm always looking at the glass half full and looking at the things that we can do given those economic headwinds. We talked about interprovincial trade here in Canada. This is our moment, so we're driving full steam ahead on creating opportunities through interprovincial trade. We talked about procurement, where we can work together to really boost our tax dollar and create good jobs and keep pushing there. Minister, you talked about energy. We're a nuclear powerhouse. That's going to create 80,000 new jobs in Ontario over the next few years. New jobs, new construction jobs, critical minerals. These are the things that we can do right here. And I would just add one last thing. The Prime Minister's called for us all to work together to boost our exports from 300 billion to 600 billion. I think that's a fantastic ambition, but now it's up to all of us collectively to deliver.
Je pense que dans l'intérêt du temps, on peut passer à la prochaine
OK.
question.
Ah, Monsieur Girard, vous
Non,
êtes
mais je vais vous
gentleman
laisser,
comme toujours.
je vais laisser répondre, Mme Gamache. Ça va me faire plaisir.
Bonjour, Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada. Monsieur le ministre, l'année prochaine, donc dans quelques semaines, ce sera le début de la révision de la CEUM. Le représentant au commerce américain a évoqué la semaine dernière 2 ententes, une avec le Mexique et le Canada. Il a répété cette possibilité-là. Est-ce que ça, c'est le pire scénario pour le Canada de négocier comme ça en bilatéral et non pas avec le Mexique?
Ben, écoutez, vous savez, dans le domaine du commerce, il se dit beaucoup de choses. Moi, je pense que ce qu'on a fait au Canada puis ce qu'on fait avec les collègues, c'est de s'assurer d'abord qu'on fait le travail chez nous. Vous savez, ce qu'on peut contrôler, c'est ce qu'on va faire. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire ensemble. On a discuté ce matin. Pour ce qui est des négociations avec nos partenaires américains, on a eu le ministre Leblanc qui est venu nous parler ce matin, qui nous a donné un peu d'état des lieux. Nous, on a toujours vu au Canada qu'un accord à 3, ça avait favorisé l'ensemble des parties, parce qu'il faut savoir qu'une décision d'un côté de la frontière a toujours un impact des 2 côtés de la frontière. On l'a vu, les chaînes d'approvisionnement sont intégrées, le commerce est intégré nord-sud dans notre hémisphère. On a eu des bonnes rencontres. J'étais avec la présidente Sheinbaum du Mexique il y a peu de temps. Écoutez, de notre côté, on sera toujours là pour avoir le meilleur accord pour le Canada. Et en attendant qu'il y ait cette révision-là de l'accord, je pense que ce qu'on vous dit aujourd'hui avec les collègues, c'est qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire de notre côté de la frontière. Il y a des choses qui vont arriver, mais il y a des choses qu'on doit faire de notre côté, bâtir une économie canadienne, s'assurer qu'il y ait plus de fluidité entre les provinces, par exemple, pour les produits et les services. On a parlé aussi d'achat local, mais aussi d'achat canadien, comment on pouvait travailler ensemble pour avoir plus de volume dans nos achats, pour avoir des meilleurs prix, pour réduire évidemment les dépenses. Alors, je vous dirais qu'aujourd'hui, le focus c'était beaucoup sur ce que nous, on peut faire ensemble. Puis pour la suite, au niveau des négociations avec nos partenaires, comme vous dites, on aura la chance de voir la suite des choses. Je ne sais pas si M. Girard veut ajouter là-dessus.
Oui. Mais une des choses qu'on a discuté aujourd'hui, c'est que le déficit d'investissement au Canada et les retards de productivité précèdent l'arrivée des tarifs. C'est un problème structurel qui remonte aux années 2000 et il y a bien des choses qu'on peut dire sur la nouvelle administration américaine, mais ce n'est pas la source du sous-investissement et du manque de productivité au Canada. Alors, on a discuté d'où proviennent ces enjeux, puis je pense qu'on a eu une excellente discussion.
Et je m'en voudrais de ne pas vous amener de l'autre côté de la frontière, de l'autre côté de la rivière des Outaouais, de vous parler de ce qui se passe à l'Assemblée nationale avec votre ancien collègue Pablo Rodriguez. Est-ce que oui,
Parle à
c'est-
M. Gérard, Mme Gamache.
non, je pense pas que M.
Parce que j'ai écouté
Rodriguez
de
n'ait
ce
jamais
oreille-là, je pensais que vous
siégé
parliez à
avec
M.
M. Girard.
jamais
Mais
été
est-ce que vous faites encore confiance à M. Rodriguez à la tête du Parti libéral? Est-ce qu'il doit partir? Est-ce que la soupe est trop chaude actuellement? Lui avez-vous parlé même?
Écoutez,
peux
quand on
continuer.
est ministre des Finances du Canada, on a beaucoup de choses à faire. Il y a eu la rencontre du G7 plus tôt cette semaine, celle d'aujourd'hui, les rencontres la semaine prochaine en Europe avec les collègues du G7. On est à la passation de la présidence du G7. Vous savez, M. Rodriguez, c'est un collègue, c'est un ami, mais loin de moi de vouloir m'immiscer dans tout ce qui se passe à Québec. Je vais laisser ça à mes collègues de Québec de faire ça. Je pense que ce que nous, on vous démontre aujourd'hui, c'est que la Fédération canadienne fonctionne. La Fédération canadienne a beaucoup à offrir. Je pense que l'unité que vous voyez aujourd'hui dans nos actions, dans notre volonté, dans notre niveau d'ambition, je pense que ça devrait rassurer les Québécois et les Québécoises que notre rôle à nous, c'est de faire fonctionner la Fédération, c'est d'assurer qu'on ait des investissements, c'est d'assurer qu'on ait un plan de croissance, c'est ce qu'on met de l'avant. Alors, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, vous devriez être rassurés de voir qu'on travaille main dans la main avec nos collègues de Québec, puis évidemment les collègues d'à travers le pays.
Next question, Jordan.
Hi, Minister Champagne, Jordan Gowling, Financial Post.
Nice to see you.
The CRA came out with the results of its 100-day improvement plan. Are you satisfied, or would you like to see them go further in terms of improvement in services?
I should turn around. Are you satisfied? No, okay, I'll take your smile as a nod. Listen, it's a step forward. I think one of the issue we had is that we had seen 100 days ago that the level of services was not meeting the expectation of Canadians. And I want to go back to the discussion we had today. We are here together because we want to offer better services to Canadians, harness technology, simplify process, reduce red tape, look at different ways we can do. You would have seen that for example, what we call the shred tax credit, which is for the research and development in science, the type of improvement we did, colleagues noted that and say that's the right thing. Listen, at the CRA, it's a step in the right direction. I want to commend the civil servant who work there. I can tell you, they wake up in the morning. I was just at their town hall. 40,000 people showed up virtually. And I said I thank them for the work. I spent half a day in a call center. It's not about them. It's about the system, the process, the tax code we need to simplify. We're on a road to offer better services. I'll give you a small example. I share it with colleagues. We receive about 30 million calls per year at the agency, and about 500,000 of them were people who lost their password. We can't afford to do that anymore. So we went digital by default. If you lose your password, like if you would do for whether with your bank or other type of services, you go digital first. So there's a lot of things like that my role has been to spearhead, to work with the board, to work with the agency, to just adopt technology, streamline processes with the focus on delivering for Canadians. And that's exactly the spirit. I can tell you, I'm talking, but I can think Brendan, I look at my colleague Craig, that's the spirit we have. How can we improve services for Canadians? And the 100-day plan was a step in that direction. We will continue because it's all about continuous improvement, use of AI, making sure we give our people the tools they need to better serve Canadians.
Canada faces an investment crisis, a productivity crisis. A lot of industry says a remedy to that would be wholesale tax reform, tax review. I'm wondering if your government is considering that at all, and I would like to hear provincial counterparts on that too,
Sure.
whether we should take a harder look at Canada's tax system to simplify it.
I'll give you a short answer, and then obviously anyone is welcome to join. We've already started that. You've seen that we have removed from the tax code what I would call inefficient taxation in some respect, making sure, for example, that tax credits, SHRED is a good example, but also the automatic benefits to Canadians. We saw that actually when I look at what we've done there is a great example of what we need to do more. I saw it in the Nordic countries that there were automatic filing for tax return. I asked the agency, they said, sir, we can do it. We have a pilot. I said, let's turn the pilot into the norm. That's the kind of thing we want to see. And certainly with respect to the tax code, we had discussions today, very open to suggestions of colleagues how we can do better, how we can remove things which are inefficient in the tax code, at the same time that we can have a tax code which obviously is, we want people to pay their fair share, but there's things that we can do to improve, and we're certainly looking at that. But I'm happy to let colleagues who want to add to that.
I'll try one.
Okay, and I'll go on.
I'll speak for all the provincial and territories. Yes, the federal government could lower the corporate taxes, the federal one.
J'aimerais toujours Éric Girard avec les mots 5. Yes, and we've all, I think collectively have been cutting taxes. In Ontario, we've cut some, in my fall economic statement, some $12 billion of tax cuts and fees. We've cut HST, we've cut personal income tax, we cut the gas tax, the accelerated depreciation on the corporate side. There's always to do more, but I come back to the productivity and growing the economy. We have an opportunity to help our companies scale up right now. We're seeing some of that intellectual property go south of the border. We have great Canadian companies, great workers. We've got a tremendous amount of opportunity there. So I think we'll continue always to review how to put more money back into businesses' pockets so they can invest. They know how to invest, where to invest, money back into people's pockets. We cut the small business tax as well. So we appreciate what, as Eric said, what the federal government has done. But collectively, I think we all want to do more to provide that investment incentives for businesses who create the jobs for our great Canadian workers in Canada and beyond.
Brenda, do you want to add something?
Brenda.
Thanks very much. I would echo the words of my colleagues in regards to the perspective on taxes, and I think the accelerated timeline on depreciation has been very well received from businesses in British Columbia, for example. But I think it's also really important to point out that when we do tax comparisons to the US, for example, we have to also take into account our healthcare system. And we, of course, want to continue to ensure that those supports are there for British Columbians. It's a very competitive tax environment. I don't think British Columbia, for example, will ever be the cheapest place to do business, but there are many, many benefits to doing business in British Columbia, and I think many of my colleagues would agree in their provinces as well. Some of the most talented people, extraordinary PhDs and researchers, and really an environment in which it's very hard to replicate. We have a lot going for us. Not only do we have that incredible skill base, we also have all of the resources that the world needs right now. So I think while we're in troubled times, there's a positive world ahead of us.
And since I have all of you, and even Bloomberg, I mean, listen to that, that's a good headline. Canada has the lowest effective tax rate for new investment of the G7. You ask me what we've done, I mean, so that I repeat, Canada today, even after you consider the one big beautiful bill of the United States, when you include the super deduction, is the most competitive tax jurisdiction for new investment of the G7. So that is Canada today. And that's something we need obviously to repeat, and making sure that the productivity super deduction, what we call the marginal effective tax rate, I'm not sure that everyone has realized that, but I can tell you my G7 colleagues have realized it, because everyone is looking at Canada, not 13.2%. We're the most competitive jurisdiction for new investment, and this is all that we say. We need to bring more private investment. That was all the purpose of the budget, but I wanted to say that. Sir, up to you.
Greg Quinn, Market News. Good afternoon. You mentioned you meeting with the Bank of Canada. I had a question on a bit of that. In Quebec, the Parti québécois said the Bank of Canada has not represented Quebec's economy well. If they become government, they will create a new currency for the province of Quebec and quit the Bank of Canada. That's different from 1995 when they wanted to keep the currency. So I wonder what you could make about this argument that in the last couple of decades, the Bank of Canada, a federal institution you look after, has done a disservice to Quebec.
But to me or to Minister Girard, you want that question?
Whoever wants to respond to that.
Well, I'll say a few words, and then first of all, the Bank of Canada is an independent entity from government, but I would say it serves well Canadians, and it has served well Quebecers as well. I mean, this is one of the most trusted institutions in the country, which has provided stability to our economy. I think it is regarded. I would say, listen, everyone is entitled to their own opinion and their views, but let's stay serious. We're facing some of the most challenging time in the nation history, I would say in the world. When I said we were facing headwind, I can tell you some are comparing the period you and I are living today to 1945. Some would say the fall of the Berlin Wall. I would say we need to make sure that the strong institutions that have made Canada the country that it is today need to be respected. They need to be, I would say, talked about because they provide that kind of stability you need. And I think the strong democratic institution, the strong banking system we have in Canada, the role of the Bank of Canada has been serving well Canadians for generations, including Quebecers, and I'm one of them. As you know, I represent a riding in Quebec, so I would say let's stay serious, let's stay focused, and let's cherish what have made this country one of the most respected one when it comes to the banking sector and stability of our currency, and stability also with respect to attracting investment and providing growth to Canadians for decades.
Bien, ça me fait plaisir de venir à Ottawa pour répondre à des questions comme ça parce qu'on ne me les pose pas souvent à Québec. Bon, d'abord, la souveraineté du Québec, c'est un projet politique légitime. La plupart des experts en économie vous diraient que ce n'est pas un projet économique ou que le Québec ne serait pas gagnant économiquement d'être indépendant. Alors, projet politique légitime, projet économique moins convaincant. Quant à la Banque du Canada, c'est une des institutions les plus respectées au Canada. Ils embauchent les meilleurs gradués. Full disclosure, I've worked there. On est une fédération. There were situations when the Bank of Canada rates looked a little high for where the state of the Quebec economy was, and there were other occasions where it was probably low in relation to where Quebec was. So overall, the Federation works well, and the Bank of Canada is a great independent institution.
Next question, Greg.
Secondly, as we come to the end of the year, as Promit noted, we've had a lot of very rosy economic data in Canada, even though many economists predicted we'd have a recession because of the U.S. tariff war. The global economy has also been quite resilient. My question about that, though, is, you know, Donald Trump argued very forcefully that tariffs would not hurt the global economy. The U.S. would come out a winner, and other parties might not be that affected. I suspect he'll continue to make that argument. Would he be right in saying now that tariffs were not terribly disruptive or damaging to the global economy?
Well, let me comment. I mean, and you don't need to take it from me. You just have to look at the OECD report that was released a few days ago. If you look at the IMF report about global growth, if you look at what they call the Western countries in a way, you will see that growth has slowed down. I mean, everyone is looking at, you know, a bit more than 1% to a large extent. Canada, to your point, has shown more resiliency than most expected. Actually, Canada, if you look at the OECD and the IMF, would have the second largest growth in terms of GDP for this year and next year. So obviously, that is the macroeconomic data. But let me be clear. If you're a steel worker in Hamilton, you don't feel this way. If you're in Latuc, in my own riding, in softwood lumber, you don't feel this way. If you're an auto worker in Oshawa, it doesn't look like that. If you produce aluminium in Kitimat, or if you're in Saguenay, it doesn't feel like that. So yes, Canada is Canada has the lowest price of entry to the U.S. market, now that everyone in the world needs to pay a price to enter the U.S. market at 5.3%. And 85% of our trade is covered to the exemption. But like I said, depending on which sector you are, in which industry you are, in which region you are, obviously the impact is felt very differently. So I would say you don't need to take it from me. Like I said, you just have to go to the uncertainty index, which is published by the IMF, that says that, you know, the level of uncertainty today is higher than 2008. this is not by accident. It is the state of the world we live today, disruption to supply chain. You had also macroeconomic issues that have happened, geopolitics. There's a number of things that have affected that, but there's undoubtedly, when you look at the G7 and what the IMF has been publishing, the headwind has been felt by all. Now, it seems that Canada, despite all that, is doing better than probably most expected because of strong fundamental. But in an uncertain world, that's why working together like we do today is so essential. Control, act on what we can do. You know, one Canadian economy, be our own best customer, making sure we do procurement together, streamlining one project, one assessment. That's the type of thing that would make the Canadian economy more resilient. But I'm happy to pass on if there's any colleagues who want to add to that.
Maybe I'll just quickly, you mentioned it, the one permit, one process is really powerful. We've got the Ring of Fire to unleash tremendous resources in Ontario and critical minerals. That's right across the country. So the one permit, one approval process with the support of the federal government will really advance that to help boost our economy, not just in the short run, but the long run as well. And of course, anything we can do to reduce red tape, we're all in.
Sure. Sir?
Hi there, Max Paris, CBC News. This is for Minister Bailey from BC.
It's great.
With regards to the MOU between Alberta and Ottawa, your boss, Premier Eby, has said that that it possibly puts a number of projects that are already underway in BC in jeopardy. What did you tell the Minister of Finance about the possibility of those projects being put in jeopardy?
Thank you for the question. Really, the focus of our work here today was to find areas where we're win-win scenarios, and there are many amongst our colleagues with BC and the federal government. We've had the opportunity to be identified for 4 major projects in a number of different areas, including LNG. We intend to continue to drive forward on those projects. We know that there's $30 billion at play in terms of delivering on them, and that will be our focus.
Okay, and I guess for Mr. Bethlen-Falvey, what I'd like to know is, so there was a carve-out in that MOU in certain environmental regulations for Alberta. Would your province, Ontario, be looking for similar carve-outs for, say, the Ring of Fire?
Yes.
Or projects in the Ring of Fire?
Yes, and I think this is reinforces what we talked about today, that we have to move quickly with speed to boost our economy. There's lots of things we can do independent of other headwinds here in Canada. We in Ontario fully support and endorse the pipeline into to the West Coast to new markets. We know that there's a lot of discussions and conversations that have to happen, but I want to be crystal clear that this makes sense. This is a time that we have, you know, our economic livelihoods are being challenged, like we haven't seen, as Minister Champagne had said, for some time, perhaps post-World War II, where we had to rebuild. This is an opportunity. So yes, we're constantly working with the federal government, looking for carve-outs, working in partnership with First Nations, and I would highlight, for example, in the Ring of Fire, the 3 First Nations directly involved have all supported building in the Ring of Fire. They've led the environmental assessment. They've led the charge to get infrastructure built. We're providing support and financing, and I know my colleague, Minister Champagne, and his colleagues will support the impact assessments to be able to get these shovels in the ground in the spring, which will bring prosperity to the north.
Anything to say about that, Minister Champagne?
Well, listen, I was just mindful of the last question because there's a vote in the House. So if you saw my staff looking, there's a vote which is, you know, every vote counts, trust me, these days, as always. So I would say, Peter just told you, you know, the concept of one project, one assessment is one that we subscribe. We want to act quickly, but also in a way that would be responsible. So I think what he described is really the spirit in what we're trying to achieve together, which is really moving faster in a number of these projects because time is of the essence. Time is not necessarily our friend. You know, that's why we put our budget also in November to allow my colleagues to be able to have more visibility, transparency as they go into their own budget season. So I may go to the next question just to make
Yeah.
sure that we can have everyone.
One
before the
last
vote.
question and follow-up, please.
Thank you,
Madam.
Minister. It's Joanna Smith with The Logic. I'll remind you, you're able to vote electronically now, so it is, that excuse
Yes,
doesn't work as
that's
well
why I
as it
have the
used to.
phone next
Yeah.
to me. Trust me, otherwise I'd be running.
I wanted to follow up on the previous question about possible carve-outs. So, Minister Bethlen Falvey, I'm curious about specifically which carve-outs Ontario would be looking for, because obviously a tanker ban wouldn't be affecting an Ontario project. So what are you looking for? Because there were sort of rationales specifically tied to a pipeline from Alberta to BC on those carve-outs in the MOU. Help us understand what you're looking for the Ring of Fire.
Yeah, I won't go into specifics, their conversations that we're having, but I think what we wanted to signal is our support for doing what it takes to get things done in collaboration with all provinces, and signal our support for the, I think, historic MOU that was signed between the Government of Canada and Alberta. We're mindful of some of the challenges and the conversations that have to occur, but this is something that Ontario supports. We have similar processes and conversations, as I mentioned, First Nations who are leading the environmental assessments in Ontario. We want the support, for example, of the federal government not to layer in their own assessments to acknowledge and approve those assessments that are being led by the First Nations themselves. So it's in that spirit that our support is there.
Okay, and the second question to Minister Champagne. I know you were asked a lot about Stellantis yesterday in the House, but I wanted to follow up on some specifics. So Conservative MP Kyle Seaback said yesterday that the contract showed that Stellantis agreed to maintain an average of 4,475 FTEs rather than the 8,000. I'm curious, like, what made you feel confident at the time in negotiating that contract to give Stellantis that amount of wiggle room?
Well, what I would say, you have, and again, I'm happy that you followed the testimony yesterday, lasted more than an hour. I tried to help them understand, appreciate that they may not be familiar with the contracts, but you have to look at the, what we call the SIF agreement, the Special Contribution Agreement, the Next Star Agreement as well, because these they're all interconnected. So if you see, you have a number of jobs which are protected, but like I said, this is a floor, because when you ask any corporate to give you a sense of how many people they will employ over more than a decade, there's always an average, and what you negotiate is a floor with commitment, because again, I don't want to be too technical, because my colleagues will probably think we're going very technical, but you know, there's another section in the agreement that was very specific as to the fact that Stellantis needs to maintain the Brampton facility open. So when you read this clause plus this other clause, and I'm a lawyer, so I happen to understand these things perhaps better than some of those who asked me the question yesterday. When you see the interaction between the two clauses, that's you say you have a floor, you have an average for more than a decade, and you have also another section that says the plant in Brampton needs to remain open. That's a covenant in the agreement. You couple that with the Next Star Agreement, which also has a floor of more than 2,200, out of memory, 2,200 people that they need to employ for more than a decade. So the interaction of these different contracts and these different sections of the contract makes me confident that we had a very solid provisions to support and defend the workers. We did that in partnership with our colleagues in Ontario. And like I said, we will enforce our rights, because those were commitments to workers, to Ontario, to Canada, and to the industry. So I think they've heard us loud and clear, and the spirit of the agreement was really to make sure that you know, we want them to be in the country, but one thing they should not forgive is that we will enforce all the rights that we have under the various agreements.
We will take this last question
No,
and follow
but
up.
yes, I'm sorry, because
Thank you.
you
Hi,
go ahead.
Minister Champagne. It's
No, they
Marlo
told me
Glass
about,
from
it's
the
not
Hill
me, it's the
Times.
vote.
No, I know.
There's few things I don't control, which
I'll be
is
quick.
the
I'll be
vote
quick.
is one of them.
Listen, so yesterday, CRA officials said that it's impossible to answer all the calls that come into the call centers, and that they were pleased with 70% of calls being answered. Do you think this is an acceptable service level, and do you think Canadians will be happy with this?
Well, one thing that I can tell you, Canadians would be surprised to learn that the Canada Revenue Agency answers more than 30 million calls per year. So that is a staggering amount that I'm not sure everyone in Canada has appreciated. So what we've said is that in order to be able to better serve Canadians and answer all the calls, we need to streamline our processes. We need to adopt technology. We need to have a callback function, something that Canadians say, well, if you can answer now, at least give me a time when you're going to call me back so I can leave my name and number. So what I'm saying is that we're implementing technology, and we're lucky because technology is our friend now to be able. We've benchmarked with other call centers and the banks and the telecom industry to say, what are they doing that we can adopt in order to serve everyone? At the same time, be mindful that, you know, we need to streamline process, adopt technology. And the example I gave you, like the few 100,000 calls, I think it's 300 to 500,000 calls. Imagine for people who lost their password. I just said we can't afford that. These people need to go online and reset their password so that we free up capacity to answer all the calls that we receive from Canadians to serve them.
Thank you.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée tout le monde. Merci. À bientôt.
On sort comme ça? Ah oui, il y a un protocole de sortie.